Chapter 2. Infiltration. Location: the safe house. The safe house in Knickerbocker Village crouched like a wounded beast, its walls weeping with damp rot and the acrid stench of neglect. Shadows draped the room in a shroud of gloom, pierced only by the frail flicker of a single bulb dangling from a frayed cord, swaying like a hanged man above the cracked concrete floor. Frank Castle sat at a battered metal table, a monolith of scars and sinew, his calloused fingers curled around a chipped mug of coffee laced with whiskey's bite. In his other hand, a slice of sausage and mushroom pizza hung limp, grease oozing onto the table's rusted edge as his bloodshot eyes fixed on the tablet propped against a stack of ammo crates. The screen flared with a YouTube video. Sammy Smith, the mutant preacher of the Church of the Saved, his voice a velvet blade cutting through the static. Frank noticed that Sammy loved to debate. He could tell by the smirk that emerged on his face when he took on someone, a predator's grin, sharp and unyielding, reveling in the kill. The whiskey burned Frank's throat as he leaned closer, the preacher's fire tugging at something buried deep, something he'd long since tried to drown. Minutes later, the video shifted to a sterile CNN studio, a cold cathedral of glass and steel that mocked the safe house's decay. Sammy sat across from Tucker Carlson, his carmine sweater a defiant stain against the sanitized backdrop, Elohim heels stitched in white across his chest like a battle cry. His dreads framed his face, a wild crown under the harsh lights, violet eyes glinting with a preacher's zeal. Tucker's voice slithered through the speakers, oily and practiced. "Let's talk numbers, Mr. Smith. The jobless rate among mutants is staggering, nearly 90%. Most rely on SSI and other social programs to stay afloat. How do you justify that burden on the taxpayer?" Sammy's smile was a slow unfurling, a rose blooming in concrete. "Burden, Tucker? You're framing survival as a crime. Most mutants are still closeted. The ones who can keep their privacy do. The ones who can't, they're out there, scrapping for life in a world that'd rather bury them." Tucker's eyes narrowed, a shark scenting blood. "Everyone can't show their faces like you, Mr. Smith," he said sarcastically. "Of course they can't, Tucker," Sammy shot back, his voice a whip crack. "They just get harassed by people like your viewers." Frank's lips twitched, a rare ghost of amusement flickering as Sammy's barbs hit their mark. Tucker pressed on, his tone a blade wrapped in silk. "But you can't deny the criminality. Black and Latino mutants display the highest level of violence, of chaos. It's not about race, it's about behavior." Sammy's laugh rumbled low, a storm brewing in his chest. 15 cases, Tucker. 15 mutants out of thousands, and you're ready to damn us all. We get it, Tucker. You don't have faith in our communities and you view us as nothing more than criminals. Mutants, especially mutants of color, aren't here to ask the Tucker Carlsons of the world for permission to exist." Frank chuckled at Sammy's snark, a dry rasp that scraped his throat. He'd figured this job would be easy. Mutants were just another target, another body to drop. But Sammy's passion, the way he wielded words like weapons, was making Frank develop an opinion, a crack in the armor he couldn't ignore. He didn't want to care. Didn't want the gray bleeding into his world of black and white, but Sammy's fire was a spark he couldn't snuff out. Valentina had reached out in early October, her voice a silken noose, pulling Frank into Harlem's orbit. Since then he'd haunted the streets, a specter in a neighborhood teetering between its soul and the sterile creep of gentrification. He'd braced himself to stand out, a white ex-Marine carved from war, stalking a sea of brown faces, but Harlem swallowed him, its pulse drowning his own. On that first night he'd perched in the shadows of a crumbling stoop, breath fogging in the autumn chill, and watched Sammy stride through the crowd. Trailing him was the fist of Elohim, young men draped in carmine suits that clung like fresh blood, ruby tennis necklaces glinting under the sodium glow of streetlights, a uniform of faith and menace. Sammy moved like a king, his smile a beacon, but the fist's eyes were restless, scanning the dark like hounds on a scent. Frank's gut tightened. This wasn't just a preacher's posse. This was a militia, coiled and ready. Sammy's grin was a mask, too bright, too practiced, a carnival barker's charm that never touched his violet eyes. Frank saw it from a rooftop 2 nights later, binoculars pressed to his face as Sammy worked a crowd outside a boarded-up bodega. The preacher shook hands, offered blessings, his voice a honeyed sermon that pulled people in like flies to rot. But the fist of Elohim whispered behind him, their murmurs a current of secrets. One figure stood apart, a man whose age was a riddle, face smooth yet eyes ancient, his dark suit a shadow against the carmine tide. A carmine tie hung at his throat, the sigil of Elohim pinned to his lapel like a quiet vow. Where Sammy blazed like a sun, This man was a crescent moon, his power a whisper that prickled Frank's spine. He etched the stranger's face into memory. Sammy might be the preacher, but this one was the enigma he'd need to unravel. The cameras loved Sammy, and Sammy loved them back. Frank saw it in every frame, outside a soup kitchen, blessing a mutant kid with scales for skin, or pacing a makeshift stage, his dreads swinging like a metronome. The media was his drug, his hunger for the spotlight, a flaw Valentina had pegged right. "He's a showman," she'd said, her voice crackling over the burner phone. "Use it." Frank could slip in, a ghost in the crowd, let Sammy's ego open the door. But the preacher's pull gnawed at him, a thread of doubt tugging at his resolve. He wasn't here to admire the man, he was here to bury him. Yet the more he watched, the more Sammy felt like a mirror, rage and purpose wrapped in a different skin. A week ago, he'd cornered Turk Barrett in an alley off 125th, the crook's breath reeking of cheap gin as Frank's shadow swallowed him. "Talk," Frank growled, his fist a promise against Turk's jaw. Turk spilled, crates of guns stashed in the church's basements, enough lead to turn Harlem into a war zone. "They're armed to the teeth, man, but I don't know the half of it," Turk whined, eyes darting like a trapped rat. Frank left him crumpled, a warning carved in ghost bruises from previous thrashings. An icy stare from Castle was enough. The cult had firepower, that much was solid, but the mutants were the wild cards, powers he couldn't predict, threats he couldn't outgun. The Save's headquarters loomed over Harlem's fractured streets, a red brick monolith scarred by time, its Romanesque. Arches, crafted in 1892, according to the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission, now choked with splintered plywood. Once the Mount Zion Community Center, a 1970s sanctuary where jazz wailed through the basement and civil rights anthems rang from the attic, it had been reborn as a mutant stronghold, its walls whispering of defiance. Graffiti slashed across the boards in crimson and gold, Elohim's chosen, mutant rising, like blood spilled in devotion. Outside, Harlem pulsed, horns blared on Lenox Avenue, jerk chicken hissed on grills, voices ricocheted off brownstones. Yet the building stood apart, cloaked in a silence that pressed against Frank Castle's chest, heavy as a loaded clip. 3 weeks had ticked by since Valentina Allegra de Fontaine handed Frank his orders: infiltrate the Saved, terminate Samuel Hezekiah Smith. He'd spent those days watching the cult's followers drift through the streets, their eyes glassy, hollowed out by a faith that burned too bright. They noticed him too, a stranger with a soldier's gait, but no one spoke, no one challenged. Instead, he'd found himself thumbing through their pamphlets, left like offerings on stoops and benches, the paper soft and worn as if handled by 1,000 desperate hands. Salvation through sacrifice, they promised, words that snagged in his mind like shrapnel, even as he told himself he was here to kill, not to listen. The headquarters stretched further up Frederick Douglass Boulevard, a fortress of faith and faded glory. Frank had circled it for days, boots scuffing the pavement, too wired to cross the threshold. He'd been a churchgoer once, Catholic, dragged to mass by his mother, the guilt of sin a weight he'd carried like a rucksack. That faith had crumbled when Maria and the kids died, ground to dust beneath his vengeance. This work, sneaking into a temple, a place of worship, felt like spitting on a grave, but sacred things had stopped mattering long ago. Still, the pull of the place gnawed at him, a quiet ache he couldn't shake. Today he'd go in. He'd worried about the mutant psychics. Valentina's dossier had flagged them as threats, their minds like knives prying at his own. But Emma Frost's psychic shield held firm, a cold wall around his thoughts. Tucked in his pocket was a failsafe, a small white button, a power-dampening device courtesy of S.H.I.E.L.D., its way to grim comfort. He climbed the steps, November's chill biting through his jacket, boots crunching ice into the concrete, and steeled himself for what lay beyond the steel door, its chipped green paint barely clinging to a sign, Salvation Through Unity. 2 guards flanked the entrance, their faces hard as Harlem stone, arms crossed over dark red suits. The fist of Elohim, the Save's enforcers, wore black armbands stitched with a clenched fist circled by thorns, a sigil that promised both salvation and violence. Their silence was a wall. Frank broke it with a nod, stepping into a hallway thick with the past. The air reeked of incense, its sweet musk tangling with the sour bite of sweat and the faint creosote of rotting wood. Propaganda plastered the walls, posters screaming against government tyranny, flyers preaching mutant pride, and a portrait of Mingus Smith, Sammy's father, a black Marine with a prophet's gaze, killed for his cause. His eyes tracked Frank, unyielding. Psychic pressure hit him from all sides, a chorus of invisible hands clawing at his mind. He felt the probing, sharp and insistent, and clenched his jaw, forcing his face to stay blank. Emma's voice ghosted through his skull, steady and dry. "Don't worry, Grumpy. The walls are still up. It helped, barely, but the weight of it pressed down, a storm he couldn't outrun. He kept moving, boots silent on the warped floor, fighting the urge to flinch. Frank stopped at Mingus's portrait, eyes tracing the Marine uniform, medals pinned like wounds, fabric creased from battles a decade before Frank's own in Iraq. The sand, the blood, the screams, it all flared up, a memory that tasted like gunpowder. Both men had walked that hell, separated by years but bound by its brutality. He didn't see Sammy watching from the shadows, violet eyes glinting, measuring the stranger who lingered too long. A voice sliced through the haze, smooth and edged with suspicion. "You're new here, ain't you?" Frank turned to face Lulu, Luella LaPointe, telepath and precog, born in New Orleans' humid sprawl. Valentina's file had her pegged, sharp-witted, dangerous, a woman who'd once read tarot in the French Quarter, peering into souls with cards and a smile. Her powers weren't Emma Frost's caliber, but they weren't to be dismissed. Her mind brushed his like a blade testing armor. High cheekbones cut her face into angles, dark eyes gleaming under flickering bulbs, braids pulled tight into a soldier's bun. Her navy jacket hung crisp against the peeling walls, and her smile was a weapon, slicing through his cover. "Yeah," he growled, voice rough as gravel, a civilian's drawl hiding the operative beneath. "Heard about this place. Thought I'd see for myself." Lulu tilted her head, smile thinning as she closed the distance, her voice a soft jab. "What drags a man like you to the Salvation? We get all kinds. Lost souls, fighters, folks just needing a bed. You don't strike me as lost." Frank's jaw tightened, his story a fragile thread. Did some time overseas, military. Saw things go sideways, lost people. He kept it short, sharp, dodging the abyss of Maria and the kids, their deaths a wound he wouldn't bleed here. "Heard y'all talk about Elohim. Figured I'd listen." Her eyes sharpened, curiosity glinting. "And what's Elohim mean to you, soldier boy?" "Soldier boy? I'm that obvious?" asked Frank. "Oh yes," Lulu said, her smile blooming, radiant enough to pull one from him despite himself. "Besides the fact you're the Punisher, everyone knows your story." "So that obvious," Frank muttered, rethinking this whole damn up. "You killed like 100 people. Shit like that goes viral," Lulu said, her gaze raking him, psychic tendrils coiling uselessly against Emma's shield while her eyes drank him in. "But from what I heard, they had it coming." Frank's brow ticked up. "You have no idea. So is that why you're here?" she pressed, oblivious to her own entanglement. "No, like you said, they had it coming," Frank shot back. "Dealing with what happens after, that's something different." His mind slid to the blood on his hands. Hundreds dead. No remorse. Just justice. If there was a God, if there was a hell, he was bound for it. A one-way ticket punched with every trigger pull. He'd never see Maria or the kids again. Not in this life or whatever came next. The thought cracked his mask, a flicker of raw grief leaking through before he locked it down. "You never answered my question, soldier boy. What does Elohim mean to you? I've seen you around a few times. Something has to have gotten you to keep coming back. What is it?" Frank shrugged, shoulders sagging with a lie. "Still figuring it. Grew up Catholic, church every Sunday, guilt and all. Stopped believing when it didn't add up. Ain't sure what fits now." Elohim, a word warped by time from Hebrew God to the saved's jealous mosaic of deities demanding sacrifice for salvation. It hung in the air, a riddle Frank couldn't solve. Lulu's smile tightened, her fingers brushing his jacket, a dare he met with stillness. "You're too steady for a drifter, too sharp-eyed. But you'll do, for now. Sermon's up." She led him into the chapel, a vast hollow alive with faith. Pews groaned under the congregation, Black and Latino faces etched with grit and hope, clad in hoodies screaming power in our blood or starched collars defying the world's scorn. Tattoos marked their skin, crosses, fists, thorns, battle scars of survival. Frankincense thickened the air, cut by the metallic tang of gun oil from the fist lurking in the shadows. Above, the vaulted ceiling, logged by Harlem World magazine as a 1900s relic, held faded angels, their halos dim, gazing down on a flock, ablaze with mortal fire. Frank slid into a back pew, boots hushed on the worn floor, the mission's weight settling like a noose. Sammy Smith would preach soon and Frank would watch, a predator in the fold, waiting for the kill. As Frank slid into a back pew, his bulk fading into the gloom, eyes mapping the room, Arnold Raw Rawlings loomed a few rows up, his frame a slab of muscle under a dark jacket, skin a deep mahogany scarred from old wars. Frank's mind flickered. Raw's name echoed Bill Rawlins, the CIA ghost from his past, but there was no resemblance. Raw's technokinetic neck bent machines to his whim. Frank and Raw recognized each other from street speeches at the HQ. This vague familiarity earned Frank a nod of respect, The wariness lingered in his steady gaze. James Proverb Kingston sprawled nearby, lean and restless in a hoodie screaming mutant power, his beige skin catching the light, eyes darting to Frank with a militant's heat. At 24, his psychic pain blasts made him a loose cannon, his Harlem drawl masking a sharp edge. Charles Zadeo sat apart, wiry and still, his cautious stare heavy with the 1997 Harlem fires, arson. By white vigilantes torching tenements, a grim echo of the 1985 move bombing in Philly. The community had rebuilt, but distrust festered, a quiet scar Charles wore like armor. Sammy Smith took the pulpit, and the air tightened, a held breath rippling through the crowd. Lean and wiry at 5 feet 11 inches, his toasted wheat skin glowed faintly, dark dreads framing a face honed by purpose. His black shirt, sleeves rolled, showed veins taut with energy as he gripped the stand. His voice rolled out, a slow fuse igniting into a blaze, its urban cadence weaving Midwest grit with New York swagger. His body language was sharp and poised. "Brothers and sisters," Sammy intoned, his rhythm a preacher's blade, "we stand on ground soaked with our blood, where the system stomps us and calls it law. We ain't here to grovel or plead. We're here to rise, to seize what's ours, to smash the liars who crush us down." His words carried Malcolm's echo, reshaped for the saved threading scripture with revolt. Elohim, call him Yahweh, Allah, what you will, ain't sittin' pretty in the sky. He's here, in the dirt, in the heart of every mutant, every soul they've tried to snap. He's the heat in our bones, and he craves justice for the broken. The crowd surged, murmurs rising to chants, fists punching the air. "Look around," Sammy roared, voice splintering with fury. "They spill our blood and grin through it. Their boots choke us, but we're done bendin'. We're the storm they can't outrun, the judgment they can't evade." His hands danced, binding the room to his will, a faint indigo shimmer at his fingertips. Valentina's warning made flesh. Frank's pulse kicked, Sammy's fire striking too close to his own buried rage. Mutants had been a blank to him, a vague shadow he'd dismissed as another target. But here, immersed in their world, their pain echoed his own. Loss, betrayal, a system that chewed up the weak. Killing Sammy could shift the tide, make Frank a target for every mutant with a grudge. Would he be hunted, marked as the man who felled their prophet? The thought tightened his chest, a new weight he hadn't planned for. Sammy's performance was a match to dry tinder, designed to spark fury, to push his flock to act. But what happened when that anger spilled over, when a mutant, riled by Sammy's words, lashed out at some regular soul? Frank saw it. The guns Turk Barrett had spilled about, crates of steel hidden in the church's depths. Valentina's claims checked out. The saved wasn't just a sanctuary, it was an arsenal, a powder keg waiting for a spark. Sammy's rhetoric was a weapon, and Frank couldn't shake the image of blood on Harlem's streets. Doubt gnawed at him. Valentina's portrait of a monster fraying against this man's truth. He kept his face a mask, logging every move, but Sammy's weight pressed against his mission's spine. Frank saw a fiery provocateur in Sammy, a man who thrived on defiance, leading a group older than he was. Why him? Why this death? The question burned, a splinter he couldn't pull. The sermon crashed to a close, cheers thundering through the chapel. Lulu nudged Frank, her eyes sharp as glass. "Sammy wants to see you. Let's go." Frank's heart thudded, but he moved, each step a calculated beat, threading past Raw's steady watch and Proverb's smoldering glare. Charles lingered, his silent gaze a question Frank couldn't answer. Fist of Elohim members watched, their carmine suits flashing like blood under the dim lights, ruby necklaces glinting like warning beacons. A figure stood apart, tall, ageless, his dark suit a shadow against their crimson, a carmine tie pinned with Elohim's sigil. His eyes, hawk-like, tracked Frank and Sammy, a predator's gaze that chilled Frank's spine. He didn't know the man's name, Jin, the immortal pulling strings, but the weight of his stare was a warning Frank couldn't ignore. Frank reached the pulpit, the air thick with wax and wood, Sammy's presence a quiet storm. He smelled of cedar and spice, a sharp edge that cut through the chapel's musk. His smile was warm but caged, violet eyes sparking with curiosity under caution. "New blood," he said, hand outstretched, grip iron tight. "Sammy Smith, who are you?" Frank knew Sammy recognized him. The Punisher's face wasn't one you forgot. Was this a dance, a test? Was death waiting in the wings? He held steady, playing the game, but his pulse ticked faster. If Sammy struck, he'd be ready. "Frank," he replied, matching the clasp, voice steady as a civilian's lie. "Saw a few TikToks. Wanted to see the real thing." Sammy's probing look lingered, weighing the answer. His chuckle was low, a spark in the dark. "Hope I delivered. Lulu says you're worth a look." His tone was easy, but his gaze dug deeper. We have people to protect, Brother Castle. Can I call you that? The lingo, brother, sister, rang familiar, a cult shorthand for loyalty deeper than blood. Many were cousins, Valentina's file had said, their bonds a steel trap. Sammy's powers, telepathy among them, were a mystery, their limits unknown. Frank flicked a glance at Lulu, her smirk a glint of jet. She think you should check me yourself? He said, testing. Sammy waved it off, smile faint but firm, his voice a preacher's calm. Nah, I trust my cousins. They say you're good, that's enough. His words shifted, street smart sliding into something sharper, a mind at work beneath the edge. Brother Castle, we are in our house, and we protected by Elohim, and those who seek the levels of grace that we have reached need only listen and have an open heart. Frank's thoughts churned. Sammy's charisma was a blade, cutting through doubt, but Elohim was a shadow he couldn't grasp. The chapel's air pressed heavy, incense and gun oil, a reminder of the cult's dual nature. Sammy was no simple mark. He was a man carrying a legacy, a fire that could burn or save. Frank's mission felt heavier, the line between hunter and hunted blurring. Sammy gestured toward the chapel's depths. Let me show you around. They moved, the fists' scowls trailing them, their carmine suits a vivid warning. The hawk-eyed man, Jin, watched from a corner, his presence a cold weight. Frank's gut twisted. This man was no follower, his power a quiet storm. Sammy spoke of the building's past, civil rights rallies in the 60s, support from the Charles Xavier Institute in 2002, his voice a tapestry of pride and pain. They drifted to a quiet alcove, wax and wood heavy in the air, where photos of Mingus Smith hung, a Marine in rigid pride staring down. That your dad? Frank asked, voice rough, a rare slip of the mask. Sammy's face softened, his Detroit lilt surfacing as he leaned against a pew, eyes tracing the faded photo. Yeah. General 4 stars, Mingus Amaru Smith, fought in the Gulf, just him and the sand, a war that didn't mean shit to nobody but the ones bleeding in it. Frank's mind flashed Iraq, sand in his teeth, blood on his hands, the war that followed him home. He saw himself there, a younger man, orders burning through him, the desert a mirror to the emptiness he carried now. He'd sit me down, Sammy continued, voice low like thunder rolling in from the horizon, talking about the heat out there, pressing down like Elohim's own fist, making you feel small, invisible. Frank usually bristled when civilians spoke of war, their words hollow. But Sammy, speaking for Mingus, felt real, as if he didn't just know war's weight but carried it. The dark violet burn in Sammy's eyes held a truth Frank recognized. Loss, duty, a fight that never ended. He was a ghost in that desert, Sammy said, drifting through a fight that didn't give a damn about him or his boys. Came back hollowed out, bones creaking with something heavy, anger maybe. He stopped, his face etched with raw honesty, a son bearing a wound. Frank caught it, the vulnerability a crack in Sammy's armor. The words spilled from Sammy like a river breaching its banks, each one laced with reverence, his code switching seamless, street grit melting into preacher's poetry. His eyes, sharp with intellect, softened at the edges, betraying a son's ache. Frank's own deserts flickered, Fallujah's dust, Maria's screams, a war that never left. I get it, he said, voice thick with grit, veiling the ghosts haunting him. Different war, same grind. Sammy tilted his head, studying Frank like a half-solved riddle, then gestured to an alcove where more photos hung. Mingus in fatigues, then in Harlem, arms around a young Sammy, both grinning under a kinder sun. My old man was a giant, Sammy said, his voice weaving pride and shadow. Not just in the flesh, though he could fill a doorway like a storm cloud, but in the spirit he carried. He'd step into a room and the air shifted, folks sitting up straighter feeling his pull. A gravitas born of scars, you know, but that weight, it bent him sometimes, pressed him low till he couldn't breathe. I feel it now, standing where he stood, trying to hold up what he left me. It's like chasing a colossus across a tightrope. Every step wobbles, and I'm wondering if I got the spine to match his. Frank saw the opening, Sammy's pride and doubt laid bare. He leaned in, voice rough but steady, a mirror to Sammy's pain. Shadows cast long when they come from men like that. I know it, lost, so much. Their ghosts weigh heavy. But you ain't him, Sammy, you're you. You don't have to carry your father's demons. Sammy's gaze flickered, a spark of gratitude or hunger lighting his face. Yeah, maybe. It's just... His echo's loud, man, a resonance that hums in my bones. I'm trying to be the pillar he was, but also the dream he carved out, something new, bigger. It's a heavy mantle, and some nights I ain't sure I'm cut for it. Frank nodded, his tone softening, a rare crack in his steel. I get that. Ghosts don't let go easy. Sammy's eyes sharpened, a fragile bridge forming between them. You've walked through fire, huh? That's why you're here, searching for a spark to make sense of the ashes. Frank seized it, words measured, a hunter baiting a trap. Yeah, something like that. Figured if anyone's got a map through the flames, it's a man who's built something out of 'em. Thought maybe you could point me right. Sammy's smile was faint but true, a preacher's warmth edged with purpose. You're in the right house, Frank. We're all about blazing trails here, together. Stick around, I'll show you the way. Frank clocked it. Sammy's need to guide, a vein of ego he could tap. He'd use it, get closer, let Sammy think he was saving a soul while Frank sharpened the blade.